Biographical Bytes from Bala, number 52 for mid-January 2026. Mary Scarpone Costanza, 1926-2001. Happy 100th birthday. Finding a Glimmer of Light in the Darkness.
Stony plots that are covered with thorn. Who are these days at peace? Who are these days at peace? Who are these days at peace? Who are these days at peace?
Welcome to Biographical Bytes from Bala, a mid-monthly podcast about people buried at Laurel Hill West Cemetery in Bala, Kenwood, Pennsylvania. I am Joe Lex, retired professor of emergency medicine from Temple University. Reach me at jrlexjr1947@gmail.com. This month's podcast came as the result of a suggestion from a listener. A couple of years ago, someone emailed, check out Mary Costanza, a woman who dedicated her career to trying to understand artwork produced by people in the ghettos and concentration camps of World War II. Well, I put her name in my book. It's called Potential Podcasts. I actually bought a copy of Costanza's book, but it sat on a shelf for the next year or so. And when I was putting together potential podcasts for 2026, I ran across Mary's name. I saw that she would fit the bill for a 100th birthday podcast about someone at Laurel Hill West. I hope you celebrate 200th birthdays for Laurel Hill East residents at the beginning of the month, the episode of All Bones Considered Laurel Hill Stories. Mary's story led me into corners of history that I had never explored. And it made me face a lot of things I would rather not have faced. It taught me about why artists are artists. And it gave me a new way of looking at their work. And now I want to share what I found with you. Biographical Bytes from Bala, number 52 for mid-January 2026. Mary Scarpone Costanza, 1926-2001. Happy 100th birthday. Finding a Glimmer of Light in the Darkness. Judaism predates Christianity by several centuries. Judaism is one of the earliest monotheistic religions, with roots that trace back to the covenant between Abraham and God, which is traditionally dated to about 2000 BCE. Anti-Semitism, prejudice against Jewish people, is almost as old. Its deep, complex roots stretch back more than 2 millennia. In the ancient Greco-Roman world, Jews were often viewed with suspicion by their neighbors due to their monotheistic faith, distinct customs, and refusal to adopt the surrounding polytheistic cultures. For example, Jews abstained from eating pork, observed the Sabbath, and rejected participation in local religious festivals, which sometimes led to accusations of being aloof or subversive. During the Middle Ages in Europe, anti-Semitic attitudes became more pronounced and institutionalized. Jews faced legal restrictions, such as being barred from owning land or joining guilds. This forced them into occupations like money lending, which became one of the few professions that was permitted to them, and this forced choice was then held against them. This economic role fostered resentment and led to damaging stereotypes. Jews were also falsely accused of heinous crimes, such as the blood libel, the myth that they used the blood of Christian children in religious rituals. What they used before Christianity existed, I have no idea. They were accused of causing the Black Plague by poisoning the wells. These beliefs incited numerous expulsions and massacres, such as the expulsion of Jews from England in 1210, from France in 1306, and from Spain in 1492. In the 15th century, Jews in Spain, which had the largest Jewish community worldwide at that time, started to experience significant persecution, anti-Semitic violence, and forced conversions. Many Jews chose death over apostasy, but around 200,000 people, nearly half of Spain's Jewish population then, converted to Christianity. Some continued to practice their beliefs covertly, despite their outward adaptation of Christianity. Many conversos, as those individuals were known, attained prominent roles within the Spanish state. Notable figures included royal court physicians such as Francisco Lopez, poets and writers like Juan de Mena, bankers including Gabriel Sanchez, all of whom leveraged their new religious status as conversos to access expanded opportunities for their fellow Jews. Starting in 1478, the Inquisition was established in Spain. It targeted conversos, who were insincere to their new faith by maintaining certain Jewish traditions in private. It now became not only uncomfortable to be Jewish in Spain, but even as a converso, life on the Iberian Peninsula was no longer safe, and it would soon not even be legal. During the reign of King Ferdinand II of Aragon, 1479-1516, and Queen Isabella I of Castile, 1474-1504, an estimated 2,000 Jews were burned at the stake. January 12, 1492, Italian merchant, navigator, and explorer Christopher Columbus met with Ferdinand and Isabella. He requested financial support for his planned westward voyage across the Atlantic. His objective was to establish a new maritime route to India. He was responding to the significant European demand for luxury goods and spices from the East during the 15th century. Because of ongoing hostilities with the Ottoman Empire and opposition from Muslim naval forces in the Mediterranean, this had effectively obstructed traditional trade routes between Europe and India via the Middle East. Despite contemporary recognition of the Earth's spherical shape, transatlantic navigation is regarded as impractical due to prevailing conditions such as the Gulf Stream, which necessitated travel against strong eastward winds, unpredictable durations at sea, and exposure to severe storms and hurricanes. So just as others had before her, Isabella rejected Columbus's proposal due to the risks and potential losses. After other unsuccessful attempts with Spain in 1486 and Portugal in 1484, Columbus next considered seeking support from France, possibly England. But a converso named Louis de Sant'Angelo intervened and changed the course of history. Sant'Angelo was the royal treasurer, and he had formed close ties with both the king and the queen. He warned Queen Isabella that supporting Columbus was vital for Spain, as another country backing him could mean missing out on substantial fame and prestige, not to mention the trade goods. Sant'Angelo even pledged his own money to help fund the voyage. Isabella was convinced. She sent for Columbus and recalled him back to court. With official support from the Spanish crown, Columbus finally received permission to embark on his transatlantic journey. This recall of Columbus was commemorated on canvas by Philadelphia artist Augustus Goodyear Heaton, whom I talked about in All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 42. The painting currently hangs in the halls of the U.S. Senate. What was Sant'Angelo's motivation in helping Columbus to the effect that he was willing to contribute large sums of money from his own pocket and put his personal safety at risk? For nearly 800 years, Jews had lived quietly under Muslim rule in Spain, which was largely a long period of tolerance, religious freedom, and prosperity, known as the Golden Age. Christian European forces never fully capitulated to Muslim rule and conducted a military campaign known as the Reconquista that slowly recaptured bits and pieces of Spanish territory over the centuries. And by the 15th century, the vast majority of Spain was now under Christian control. The last bastion of Muslim rule was over the city of Granada. But after a siege and a series of battles in 1491, that city surrendered January 2nd, 1492, 10 days before Columbus met with the Spanish monarchs. Word on the street or in the palace was focused on religious unity. And now that the struggle against the Muslims was over, the focus would soon shift to the Jewish problem. So maybe, just maybe, Santangel's motivation in sending out Columbus was to find a new haven for the Jews of Spain, which would soon be urgently needed. March 31st, 1492, the Alhambra Decree was enacted. This effectively ended the practice of Judaism within the Spanish kingdom. Jews were allotted 4 months to either convert to Christianity so they could stay in Spain or depart and practice Judaism in exile. Frantically, the Jewish community sought to sell their properties, settle outstanding debts, and identify possible migration routes. Now, this was the same time that Columbus was assembling his crew for an imminent expedition, and some Jews and conversos viewed participation in such a voyage as their best opportunity to leave Spain, and they signed on. So among the 90 crewmen of Spaniards and Moors on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria were known to be 2 experienced Jewish sailors, Rodrigo de Triana and Alfonso de la Calle, a physician, the Maestre Bernal, a surgeon named Marco, and Queen Isabella's personal inspector, Rodrigo Sanchez de Segovia, probably the most high-profile Jew on board who had recently converted to Christianity by force, was Luis de Torres, an interpreter for the governor of Murcia. As a result of his knowledge of Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, and other ancient languages, Columbus thought his linguistic skills would be useful in communicating with the locals. Records show Columbus was initially scheduled to depart from Spain July 30th. 1492. There were an awful lot of Spanish Jews that were trying to get out of the country before the decree was enforced the next day. Their 4 months were up. The harbor at Palos de la Frontera was jammed, which resulted in a delay of the Columbus voyage. Many Jews arranged passage with Muslim sailors to North Africa. Others departed aboard Ottoman vessels bound for Turkey. Some contemplated other destinations, including those to the west. And ultimately, on August 3rd, 1492, Columbus and his crew embarked on their historic expedition and set sail with a fleet of 3, the Santa Maria, the Nina, and the Pinta. After more than 2 months on the open sea with no land in sight, the crew was restless. On October 11th, Columbus begged the crew members to remain vigilant for any sight of land, both day and night. He even offered a bonus as an incentive. And that night, around 2 a.m. on October 12th, while the rest of the crew were either sleeping or drinking, Rodrigo de Triana, one of the Jewish sailors, spotted a faint light in the distance. It was a fire, and that could mean only one thing. Tierra! Tierra! Land. Land. And thus it was a Jewish sailor who became the world's first European explorer to see the Americas. Columbus and his crew continued their exploration of the newly discovered lands. They reached Cuba by the end of the month, a region that Columbus initially believed was part of China. From the northern shores of Cuba, Columbus dispatched his Jewish interpreter, Louis de Torres, inland to establish contact with what he presumed was the Emperor of China. Instead, Torres encountered a village of about 1,000 inhabitants who had never previously encountered Europeans. They regarded him with great reverence. During his visit, Torres was introduced to the practice of tobacco smoking, a custom he later relayed to his Spanish colleagues upon returning to Europe. The subsequent island discovered was named Hispaniola, its present-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And it's there that 39 crew members, including Louis de Torres, established a settlement. This marked the founding of La Navidad, the first European colony in the New World, which included at least one Jewish settler. Now, you may think of the Inquisition as a medieval event, but the Americas served as a refuge for Jewish communities fleeing the Inquisition and subsequent persecutions, including pogroms and the Holocaust. From the initial stages of European exploration, Jewish individuals played significant roles and in some instances contributed leadership to the process of nation building throughout the Americas. Let's skip ahead to the 19th century in the New World. There's a rapid population increase in Central Europe, but it's combined with land scarcity and rising unemployment. This created severe challenges for rural communities, led to a significant emigration, particularly from Germany to America. For example, in just 2 weeks in 1817, 4,000 people departed from the small state of Baden in southern Germany. Throughout the decades that followed, European emigration increased steadily. In the 1860s alone, over 1 million newcomers arrived in America, including a substantial number of Jews, mostly from Germany. In America, immigrant communities developed their own social hierarchies based on the timing of the arrival. So earlier Jewish settlers, the Sephardim, who'd been in America since the time of Columbus, came to see themselves as the elite within the Jewish community. Remember, the oldest synagogue in the United States was founded by Portuguese Jews. Touro Synagogue, Newport, Rhode Island, dates to colonial 1764. These established Jews kept social distance from the new arrivals and often assumed leadership roles for them. Successive waves of immigrants, especially German Jews, had to repeat the entire process of settlement and integration. Some of these newcomers sought to join the ranks of the established Sephardic elite by achieving economic stability and adopting Sephardic customs in a process referred to as Sephardization. In 1853, Sephardic Jew Judah Benjamin, who was later Secretary of the Treasury for the Confederate States of America, was the first Jew selected as a United States Senator. German Jewish immigrants generally placed a higher value on traditional Jewish observance and education than their Sephardic counterparts. They were disappointed by what they saw as diluted Jewish practices among American Jews. Some of them even had services on Sunday. So they established a vibrant religious and philanthropic life alongside their business activities. And by 1880, the Jewish community in the United States numbered about 250,000. Now they were predominantly German descent. They were spread across the continent. In the West, Jews constituted 1.5% of the population. In the Northeast, they only made up about 0.5%. They were apparently doing well in the New World, as 70% of Jewish households employed one or more servants. A federal survey in 1890 revealed a relatively prosperous American Jewish community, which included prominent Philadelphia families such as the Gratz family. Barnard Gratz had arrived in 1754. Michael Gratz, his brother, another early settler, played key roles in establishing the Sephardi synagogue Mikveh Israel, the oldest in Philadelphia. The Gratz family is recognized as a prominent Jewish lineage whose historical legacy is closely tied to Philadelphia and the broader United States. The influence of the Gratz name traces its origins to the era of the American Revolution. Notably, the family's history is characterized by patriotism, economic achievement, philanthropy, and a long-standing commitment to supporting Jewish education. Rebecca Gratz, 1781-1869, was perhaps the most prominent and inspirational member of the family. In 1838, Rebecca created the Hebrew Sunday School Society in Philadelphia, which became the launch pad for all Jewish congregational education in North America. She was also profoundly concerned with the social issues of her day. Rebecca was instrumental in the creation of the Female Hebrew Benevolence Society, a Jewish foster home, the Fuel Society, the Sewing Society, and more. With so many accomplishments to her name, it is not hard to understand why Rebecca Gratz is rumored to have been the model of Rebecca, the heroine in Sir Walter Scott's Ivanhoe. Rebecca Gratz never married. She could never find a suitable partner with her religious beliefs. Thomas Sully painted her twice. One of those portraits greets you at the Rosenbach Museum, and it is stunning. Motivated by Rebecca's influence, her brother Hyman Gratz collaborated with the Hebrew Education Society of Philadelphia to establish and fund a teachers' college that bears the family name and is dedicated to Jewish education. During my years commuting on the 44 SEPTA bus to Center City to attend theater or do my radio show, I frequently passed Mikveh Israel Synagogue while I was walking from 4th Street to 2nd Street. I had never previously investigated the significance of mikveh. I've heard the word all my life, and I never know what it meant. It's a bath used for ritual immersion in Judaism. It's intended to achieve purity. Its use dates way back, centuries before the Christian baptismal font. The mikveh holds a central role within Orthodox Jewish communities. According to rabbinic tradition, the construction of a kosher mikveh takes precedence over building a synagogue. A Jewish community is required to ensure its establishment, even if it means selling Torah scrolls or the synagogue itself to secure the necessary funding for a mikveh. By 1880, there were 270 Jewish congregations and many philanthropic and fraternal organizations across the country. The Union of American Hebrew Congregations emerged as the most significant national Jewish body. And by 1890, many synagogues founded by German Jews had shifted from traditional practices to Reform Judaism. The Hebrew Union College, established in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1875 by Isaac Mayer Weiss, trained Reform rabbis and provided leadership for this transformation. Orthodox Jewry, meanwhile, persisted only in small groups and a few congregations. Jewish leadership in many communities during the 1880s and 1890s tended to be composed of prosperous merchants, mostly bankers or lawyers, who saw their faith as a reasonable American religion when compared with the Presbyterians and the Episcopalians. Reform Judaism emphasized the moral and ethical teachings of tradition. They largely abandoned ritual observance, but even those who ceased religious practice were still regarded as Jews. Between 1830 and 1870, Philadelphia saw a significant influx of German Jews. The Jewish population grew from about 8,000 in 1860 to 12,000 by 1877. The small established community was soon joined by newcomers who required support. So this prompted the expansion of philanthropic organizations from 3 to 10 by 1854. And it was the next year that the Hebrew Charity Ball Association was established, and that annual event remained a major fundraiser until 1901. By 1880, with about 15,000 Jews in Philadelphia, the city had a Jewish hospital, welfare agencies, an orphan asylum, a cultural association, and a Hebrew school. All were growing steadily with leadership from successful German immigrants. By 1893, the influx of East European Jews had begun to reshape the American Jewish community. Immigration from Eastern Europe, which grew in the 1870s, surged after the pogroms of 1881, again in 1890 and 91, and especially during the era of war, revolution, and reaction in Russia, starting with the Kishinev pogrom of 1903. From 1904 to 1908, 642,000 Jews arrived, with most settling in large cities like New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, Cleveland. When the East European Jews first arrived in America, they encountered a foreign and often hostile environment. The industrial economy demanded cheap labor, but it showed little concern for workers' well-being. Even the established Jewish community felt unfamiliar and unwelcoming to them, with Reform temples that would hold services on Sundays and worshipers with uncovered heads. Now the German Jews were in a position of power. They viewed the new immigrants as lacking in culture, being clannish, resisting Americanization, the same complaints leveled against German Jews a half a century earlier. They considered the new arrivals aggressive, assertive, an embarrassment to the established reputation of American Jews. The newcomers spoke Yiddish and held political and religious ideas considered radical by the German Jews. Now, Yiddish had been around for a while. It originated in Central and Eastern Europe around the 9th century. It was a fusion of Middle High German dialects with elements of Hebrew, Aramaic, later Slavic languages, but it reflected the diverse environments in which Ashkenazi Jews lived. Over time, Yiddish became the vernacular language of millions of Jews in Europe until the mid-20th century. German Jews saw these immigrants as a threat to their efforts at assimilation, while East Europeans believed the German Jews were abandoning traditional Jewish identity by changing languages, discarding dietary laws, and making their synagogues look like churches. These tensions eventually led German Jews to support anti-immigration measures in the 1870s. The head of the United Hebrew Charities in Philadelphia wrote to government officials and expressed concern about illegal immigration and the burden that it placed on local charities. That was 150 years ago. Everything old is new again. Between 1908 and 1914, immigration averaged more than 100,000 Jews per year. Restrictive U.S. immigration laws in 1921 and 1924 reduced this to about 11,000 annually by the late 1920s. And by 1927, the U.S. Jewish population had reached about 4.2 million, 3.6% of the total population. Over half of Jews in America lived in New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia. East European immigrants brought with them strong feelings of Jewish unity, religious devotion, traditional values, but many were poor, less educated, and they were also influenced by secular ideas. Despite adjusting their practices to American life, most aimed to maintain a traditional Jewish identity. Orthodox, Reform, conservative branches have all existed in the old country and were modified appropriately in the new world. Eventually, German Jews realized the influx could not be halted, so they revived their commitment to traditional philanthropy. And despite initial reluctance, the established Jewish community provided aid to the immigrants, created organizations, offered night schools and lectures, and sought to help newcomers adapt. Efforts, of course, were motivated by both a desire to facilitate acceptance among broader American society and by a sense of communal responsibility. German Jews, by now, occupied positions of authority. They were employers, benefactors, community leaders for the new arrivals. Religious Jews among the new immigrants faced challenges in maintaining observances such as keeping the Sabbath and obtaining kosher food. This caused a lot of disappointment, and some actually returned to their countries of origin. Most, however, remained. They formed close-knit communities. They established synagogues, Hasidic prayer groups, religious schools for their children. The growth of Philadelphia's Jewish community reflected both ongoing tension between newcomers and established residents and a strong sense of communal responsibility. United Hebrew Charity significantly increased its spending on relief, and other institutions like the Jewish Foster Home and Hebrew Education Society expanded to meet growing needs. Touro Hall opened in 1891. It housed several educational and social service agencies near the main area of immigrant settlement. Now, just as the synagogue in Newport, the hall was named for the Dutch-born Rabbi Isaac Touro, who had settled in Rhode Island in 1760. With the surge of immigrants, the greatest challenge was raising sufficient funds. Inspired by the success of federated fundraising in other cities, Philadelphia Jewish leaders convened in 1901 to establish the Federation of Jewish Charities. They elected Judge Mayer Sulzberger as chairman. The Federation was managed by a small group of German Jews, mainly successful merchants and manufacturers, connected by familial and social ties. And by 1905, the Jewish population in Philadelphia had grown to 75,000. This greatly increased community needs. And the question on everybody's mind was, what about education, especially higher education? December 18th, 1856, Philadelphian Hyman Gratz, this is Rebecca's brother, entered a deed of trust with the Pennsylvania Company for Insurance of Lives and granting annuities. This deed provided that from and immediately after his death, the income and interest of the properties and stocks which had been set aside were to be distributed to three heirs: Martha Ellen Sprigg, Robert Gratz, the adopted son of Hyman Gratz, and Horace Moses, nephew of Hyman Gratz. It further provided that if these conditions were met, quote, then to convey and assign all the said trust estate and premises to the Portuguese Hebrew congregation Kal Kadash Mikveh Israel of the city of Philadelphia and their successors, in trust for the establishment and support of a college for the education of Jews residing in the city and county of Philadelphia, for which purpose the rents and income only of the said trust shall be used and applied from time to time, and for no other use, intent, or purpose whatsoever. Less than 6 weeks later, January 27, 1857, Hyman Gratz, who was born just months after the founding of our country, died in his 81st year. Martha Ellen Spriggs received monies from his estate until her death in 1870. 7 years later, Robert Gratz died unmarried and without lawful issue. October 15, 1893, Horace Moses died also unmarried and without leaving lawful issue. And a meeting of the Board of Managers of the Kal Kadash Mikveh Israel held on October 29, 1893, Dr. Solomon Solis Cohen, a member of the board, notified the congregation that the Hyman Gratz Trust Estate had become vested in the congregation for the establishment and support of a college for the education of Jews residing in the city and county of Philadelphia. And thus was born Gratz College. When the organizing committee gathered to set the rules, they laid out 8 guidelines. Number 4 said, to establish a college in which young men and women pursuing secular studies at other schools might be taught certain branches of Jewish knowledge, especially the Hebrew language and something of its literature and the history of Jews and Jewish thought, including the relation of Jewish history and thought to the general history of civilization. End quote. The organizing committee's key decision was to create a curriculum specifically for training teachers. At that time in Philadelphia, there were no formally trained Jewish teachers. Those teaching were knowledgeable and observant, but they lacked pedagogical training and understanding of American-born children. Their dedication was evident, but cultural and educational gaps remained between instructors and pupils. In contrast, Philadelphia relied heavily on amateur teachers, many of whom worked for free, and some of these teachers were public school educators with some background in teaching, but overall they generally lacked sufficient knowledge of Judaism. No matter how committed or enthusiastic these educators were, they could only share what they knew, and unfortunately for many, their knowledge was quite limited. To address this issue, the Board of Trustees planned to establish a reliable source of well-educated American Jewish teachers. On Monday, January 3rd, Gratz College was informally opened to 22 students aged 14 to 30, both male and female. Its stated curriculum was simple. The course of study is to cover 3 years and will include Hebrew language, Bible and Mishnah, Jewish literature from the biblical period to the present, history of the Jewish people from biblical to modern times, pedagogics. This curriculum stayed basically unchanged for the first quarter century. Gratz College was never intended to be a theological seminary. Its intent from the beginning was to educate Jews into how to teach Judaism. Now, the first Hebrew high school of Philadelphia class was graduated in 1925. That same year, a subcommittee went on record to say that the course of instruction at Gratz College should be maintained and gradually improved and enlarged as the student material entering college was strengthened by the graduates of the Hebrew high school. For a complete recounting of the early days of Gratz, download the 1979 doctoral thesis, A History of Gratz College, 1893-1928, by Diane A. King. It is superb. Gratz College evolved with the times. Their involvement in Holocaust studies began in the 1970s, driven by a growing awareness of the need for formal education on this profound historical event. In response to increasing interest from both educators and the Jewish community, Gratz College established some of the earliest academic courses in the United States focused specifically on the Holocaust. Faculty members with expertise in Jewish history and education collaborated to design curricula that not only chronicled the events of the Holocaust, but also explored its broader moral and societal implications. The program started with undergraduate and graduate courses. It quickly established a reputation for academic rigor and depth. Over time, Gratz College expanded its offerings to include advanced degree programs in Holocaust and genocide studies, hosted national conferences, and fostered scholarly research, solidifying its role as a pioneer and leader in this critical field of study. One of the instructors they hired was an artist named Mary Scarpone Costanza. Mary Scarpone was born in 1926. Happy 100th birthday. She grew up on the main line. She was raised in a Roman Catholic household. It was full of the iconography of her faith, candles flickering before statues, paintings of saints, the quiet hush of chapels. Her world was defined by ritual and beauty, and by the sense that art was not simply decoration, but a vessel for meaning. And she learned from her priests that the Jews were, if not the enemy, then at least to be avoided. She first learned about the Holocaust from an issue of Life magazine. There was a photograph of emaciated bodies being steam shoveled into ditches that haunted her for the rest of her life. She later admitted, "I never met a Jewish person or a black person until I attended Temple University." Temple was her eye-opener. She graduated with a degree in education in 1950, so teaching was her profession, but art was her passion, her life. In 1953, she married fellow artist and ceramicist John Costanza. Mary was a painter. Images of the Holocaust started to seep into her work. She wanted to learn more, so she became a self-taught Holocaust scholar. Costanza explored the theme of mother and child throughout her life. She combined these two passions into harrowing images of starving mothers and children in the concentration camps. Her drawings were done in commemoration of the 1.5 million children who perished in the Holocaust. One of her drawings is literally called Starvation, as a mother offers her breast to an emaciated child. The child's transport, no survivors, portrays a cluster of children all huddled together, imprisoned behind a swirl of barbed wire. In the introduction to her book, The Living Witness, Mary says, "I first learned about artwork produced in the concentration camps when I read Nora Levin's book, The Holocaust, The Destruction of European Jewry. In the chapter on Terrorism, she described activity in the arts which included painting and drawing. I found this mind-boggling. As an artist, I cannot work when I'm under stress or not at peace with myself. Although the core of much of my own work is the depiction of human suffering, it is no great task to make these commentaries from the vantage point and the solitude of a comfortable studio. But these artists are caught up in that maelstrom, experiencing all the agony and pain. To me, this was unfathomable, and in reflection, even after all this time, it seems utterly miraculous." End quote. During the 1970s, Mary Scarpone Costanza taught at Gratz College. She helped students understand artists who persisted in creating despite severe oppression. Even under threat of death, they continued their work, driven by the same compulsion that moves writers to write or teachers to teach. When I was doing the podcast about the Red Rose Girls, I remember that muralist Violet Oakley said she used to paint with her tongue on the roof of her mouth when she was away from her canvas and her palette. Mary Costanza was one of the instructors who attracted scholars to Gratz for their postgraduate work. Her first Holocaust painting, 1975 oil, it's titled Crystal Nacht. It's an abstract expressionist work. Agitated brushstrokes, white, blue, red, orange, dissolve into prisms of shattered glass that faintly resemble Stars of David. The muted colors and the dreamlike element of the images reflect the artist's indirect relationship to actual events. Mary's most harrowing painting is Children's Boxcar Ride, in which rows of frightened eyes peer through the slatted openings of the transport carrying them to their death. The subdued colors make the children's pale faces seem even more ghost-like. Arts about such a horrifying event as the Holocaust can be tricky, to say the least. Philadelphia remembers its victims on a wedge of land at 16th Street and the Ben Franklin Parkway. It's just northwest of City Hall. Stone, steel, memory converge to mark the very edge of unspeakable loss and enduring hope. You see people move past it with their lunch bags or their skateboards, and they're not noticing it at all. But if you stop, if you really look, you're going to see a cast bronze flame, tall, abstract. It reaches skyward. Around it are 6 pillars, one for each million lives extinguished. Million. Step closer, you'll notice the granite walls inscribed with the words, "Lest we forget." There are names etched there too, and dates, and the places where communities just vanished overnight. On some afternoons, sunlight falls just right. The flame seems to flicker for real. It's a trick of the light. It almost feels deliberate, though. You stand there, you're surrounded by echoes of the past, of the stories not just remembered, but fiercely insisted upon. The sounds of the surrounding city are distant and ethereal and almost unreal. Now, visit New York City's Museum of Jewish Heritage, down near Battery Park. There, the architecture itself is a memorial. The building is a six-sided structure. It echoes the Star of David. There's a garden that's planted with roses for remembrance. And you can walk through the gallery, see artifacts that survived, like shoes, photographs, letters. Remember that so much did not survive. Then there's the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. When you enter, you're given an identification card. It bears the name and the occupation and the story of a real person, a victim or a survivor. You won't know until the tour is over whether you survived. The building's design, all harsh lines and exposed steel, is meant to be unsettling. There are no easy corners. There are no comforting spaces. The permanent exhibition is a journey. You walk past piles of shoes, through cattle cars, across maps that chart the spread of destruction. Travel farther. You'll find Berlin's memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. This field of gray concrete slabs, they vary in height. They undulate over uneven ground, and you wander through. It's a maze. You lose sight of the city. The horizon vanishes. Sound becomes muffled. Some of the slabs are as tall as you are. Others barely rise over the ground. You can trip over them. Children run and play between them. Sometimes you hear laughter. This is an ambiguous monument. It's unsettling. It's open. It invites you to experience confusion and loss and contemplation. Consider Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, Israel's official memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. Here the Hall of Names is circular. Its walls are lined with photographs. Its ceiling is a dome that bears thousands of names. The children's memorial is carved from a rock. It reflects candle flames infinitely in a darkened space. It becomes a constellation in the sky, a constellation of memory for the 1.5 million children who were murdered. I visited Auschwitz on a bitterly cold, snowy day on the last day of February in 2012. Yes, it was a leap year. The term sobering does not even begin to describe the emotions that welled up when I saw a locker full of Zyklon B canisters, a literal room full of human hair removed from victims, another room with tens of thousands of pairs of glasses, a cul-de-sac with a death wall where people were summarily executed, the gas chambers with human finger claw marks still visible high on the walls, and the ghastly crematories. I learned this was the last place in the world where you would complain about your feet being cold. There are lots of smaller places to remind you, memorial stones embedded in European sidewalks. They're called Stolpersteine. Each one bears the name of a person who lived and died there. There are memorial gardens, sculptures, plaques. Each exists not to comfort, to challenge, to ask what it means to remember, and to warn against forgetting. I'm a retired physician. I was horrified that so much of the killing was done by people in my profession, men and women who had taken an oath to first do no harm, primum non nocere. I found a proposed answer early in Robert J. Lifton. He died in 2025, but his book, The Nazi Doctors, is a classic. In October of 1939, Directive number 1306 from the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda used the term Untermensch, or subhuman, in reference to Polish ethnicity and culture as follows. Quote, "It must become clear to everyone in Germany, even to the last milkmaid, that Polishness is equal to subhumanity. Poles, Jews, and Gypsies are on the same inferior level. This must be clearly outlined until every citizen of Germany has it encoded in his subconsciousness that every Pole, whether a farm worker or intellectual, should be treated like vermin." Lifton reported that Nazi doctor Fritz Klein, when confronted with the evidence of the crematories and asked how he justified his action against the Hippocratic Oath, he came up with this pretzel logic explanation. Of course I am a doctor, and I want to preserve life. And out of respect for human life, I would remove a gangrenous appendix from a diseased body. The Jew is the gangrenous appendix in the body of mankind. With that justification, 6 million human beings were destroyed. World War II officially lasted for 2,194 days. The conflict began September 1st, 1939, with Germany's invasion of Poland, and ended on September 2nd, 1945, when Japan formally surrendered. Let's see, 6 million people over 2,194 days. That's about 2,735 people per hour. 45 people per second were killed over a 6-year span. How did art produced by those in the camps vary from those of mere observers? That's what Mary was trying to find out. Imagine the constraints inside the wire. It's a world stripped bare of color, music, beauty. Supplies were scarce, maybe a scrap of paper, a stub of pencil, a little bit of charcoal that you scavenged from a fire. Even those who were issued drawing supplies for their assigned work had to suffer with poor quality equipment. Artists used whatever was at hand, a fragment of wood, a piece of cloth, a stone, a potato sack. And there was fear, always fear and secrecy. Art had to be hidden from the guards, or it would mean punishment or even death. Imagine writing a sonnet to a loved one you left back in the village, and you knew that if you were caught writing that sonnet, you might be shot. Yet, despite all of this, prisoners produced astonishing works. Some were portraits, quick sketches of friends, loved ones, fellow inmates. Some were landscapes, scenes of daily life in the camp, the roll call, barracks, the endless waiting. Others were abstract, haunted visions, attempts to capture the suffering and the hope that flickered, sometimes faint, sometimes bright. How much amazing art has been lost to history will never be known. For these artists, creating was not just an act of expression. It was an act of resistance and necessity. It meant asserting their humanity in a place that had been designed to erase it. It meant leaving behind something, a message. I was here. I saw. I felt. I loved. Mary spent years tracing these works. She combed through archives and journals. She interviewed survivors, their families, those who had found a stray drawing folded into the lining of a coat, tucked beneath a floorboard. She learned their language so she could interview better. Each piece was a story, sometimes grim, sometimes luminous, but always, always urgent. Prisoners' art is immediate, raw, and intimate. Observers' art tends to be reflective, meditative, shaped by the struggle to comprehend the incomprehensible. Observers have the luxury of distance. They can mourn and rage and hope. But their works often ask you to join in a collective process of meaning-making. Mary understood this distinction. She wrote about it. She lectured on it. She debated it at conferences. For her, the difference was not just in style or medium, but in the very purpose of the art. Prisoners created to mark the moment, to hold on to shreds of identity, to survive. Observers created to remember, to teach, maybe to warn. Imagine Mary, an outsider in the best sense, walking the halls of her college, a place with mezuzahs on the doors and the murals of Jewish history covering the walls. She was welcomed, sometimes warily, sometimes warmly, by students and faculty who saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who understood that memory is not a fixed thing, but a living conversation. Her office, always cluttered with books and sketches, became a haven for students seeking answers, not just to historical questions, but to existential ones. What does it mean to create under oppression? How do you honor the past without being swallowed by it? What is the work of faith, Catholic, Jewish, otherwise, in making sense of suffering? Mary's research took her across continents. She visited surviving artists, sometimes frail, sometimes still fiercely alive. She listened to stories told in half whispers, in tears, in laughter. She handled artifacts with reverence. She believed that each bore the fingerprints of resistance. She wrote books, essays, articles, letters. She argued that art from the camps is not just documentation, it is testimony. It is proof, not just of atrocity, but of resilience. She taught her students to see not only the horror, but the flicker of hope in every line, every brushstroke. And she did this at a college that was, for most of its history, a place where Jewish tradition and scholarship was paramount. Mary was not trying to belong. She was trying to understand. In doing so, she became part of a tradition that embraces outsiders, welcomes questions, and honors the complexity of identity. Eventually, Mary Scarpone Costanza disavowed all religions. She gathered works from around the world. Her husband later admitted she smuggled some drawings out of Russia. In 1979, she stunned the world with its first exhibit of artwork made by victims of the Holocaust. 60 drawings from 18 artists, 7 of whom were killed by Nazis. One of the works was by Karl Schweissig, a non-Jew incarcerated in France for his anti-Nazi views. He would make his drawings on the margins of stamp sheets as he worked in the camp post office. His minuscule representations of ongoing atrocities were small enough to be smuggled out of camp. Another victim of the labor camps drew only at night, and she hid her artwork in clay pots, which she buried. Years later, she returned to the site and recovered her artwork. The book, The Living Witness, Art in the Concentration Camps and Ghettos, was published to great acclaim in 1982 as the first book of its kind. It is now a standard text in Holocaust study programs. When a similar book was published in 1987 about art published in camps where Japanese Americans were forced during World War II, Mary wrote the introduction to that book. I have tentatively scheduled a podcast about Japanese internment camps for later in 2026. We do have some of the victims buried at Laurel Hill West. Mary did not shy away from the hard questions. She asked again and again, how did they do it? Why did they do it? She found answers not in the certainty of scholars, but in the humility of witnesses. Mary showed her students that art is not just a mirror. It is a window, a doorway, a bridge across time and space. She taught that to study the past is to engage with the present, to imagine a future in which suffering is not erased but transformed. There is a profound divide between the lived experience of Holocaust victims and the rest of us. Survivors have been described as having dwelt on another planet, in a universe apart from everyday understanding. When Robert Lifton started his study of Nazi doctors, he interviewed a man who spent 3 years in a camp as a dentist. His reflections summed up what he had seen. He said, quote, "This world is not this world," end quote. I think what he was saying is, do humans even own the capacity to understand what went on in those camps? It's easy, perhaps it's necessary to underestimate the enormity of the horrors. In fact, the sheer scale and horror of the Holocaust are often so overwhelming that our minds instinctively try to minimize or distance us from reality. The phrase Nazi concentration camp is often used loosely to refer to various types of internment sites operated by Nazi Germany. The Nazi regime employed various types of detention and murder facilities within Germany and the territory it conquered and occupied. Nazi allies also operated their own internment facilities. The Encyclopedia of Camps and Ghettos estimates that these sites totaled more than 42,000 locations, of which 980, almost 1,000, were Nazi concentration camps proper. 6 of these camps had a sole purpose: the murder of people they considered undesirable. Our tendency to underestimate its enormity probably serves as a psychological defense mechanism. We can never fully comprehend such unfathomable suffering without becoming completely paralyzed by grief or despair. Yet, we have to recognize and confront the true magnitude of these atrocities. It is vital to honor the victims and ensure that such events are never repeated. I would tell one small story. There are literally hundreds, thousands of stories like this. Joseph Mengele, he was a physician. He was obsessed with twins, and he gathered dozens of pairs for his private study. There were a couple of angelic-looking Romani preteen boys who became favorites of all the doctors in the camp, but Mengele was convinced that the boys were tubercular. Other clinicians disagreed with him. Well, they argued back and forth. They bickered. Mengele told the other doctors, "All right, you wait here," and he disappeared. And he returned about an hour later, and he shook his head. He said, "Well, you were right." Mengele had shot the boys in the neck to paralyze them, and then dissected them while they were still warm to try to prove his point. Other studies involve lethal injection with phenol, vivisection to study muscle anatomy and physiology, hypothermia, hideous ways to treat fellow human beings. Mary Scarpone Costanza spent decades navigating this abyss, confronting the unimaginable suffering and the deliberate destruction of every facet of humanity by the Nazi regime. Her work challenges us to face harsh truths, ask ultimate questions about human nature and values, and search for signs of resilience and compassion in a world turned upside down. It haunted her work and her life. Throughout the years, many have asked whether art and literature can truly capture the life-affirming transcendence once found in creative works. After the Holocaust, silence prevailed among writers and artists. They struggled to find words and images for such overwhelming atrocity. The thought of writing poetry about the Holocaust seemed obscene. But the silence eventually gave way to a new literature, a new visual record, thanks in part to the diaries, the sketches, and the paintings produced in ghettos and camps, often at great personal risk. The raw immediacy of these works bears witness to suffering that cannot be relieved by artistic transformation. They present hunger, loss, and despair with a directness that demands we feel the pain rather than escape it. Mary Scarpone Costanza was not a Holocaust survivor, but she immersed herself in this universe of loss and creation. She built upon her own artistic preoccupation with the Holocaust to document the art of victims and survivors. Her pivotal book, The Living Witness, stands as a testament to the indomitable will of artists who, even under the threat of death, found ways to record their world, using scraps of paper, whatever materials they could find. And in doing so, she unearthed hundreds of previously unknown works and brought their creators' stories to light. In January of 1999, Mary was diagnosed with brain cancer, followed by surgery, 6 weeks of radiation therapy. There was an article in the paper that mentioned how the previously condemned drug thalidomide was back in the armamentarium of certain oncologists and was being used on Mary's cancer. The treatment may have bought her some time, but Mary Scarpone Costanza died in early January of 2001, about 2 years after her diagnosis. She's buried in the South Lawn section of Laurel Hill West. She was survived by her husband John, a daughter Nina, and 3 grandchildren. In her death announcement, Mary's family suggested contributions to the Federation of Jewish Agencies. It's now known as the Jewish Federations of North America, and they distribute more than $2 billion annually in philanthropic grants to Jewish organizations. Biographical Bytes from Bala was conceived, researched, written, narrated, and produced by me, Joe Lex, retired professor of emergency medicine from Temple University, on the cheap, on the fly, with free software and a voice recorder that I think is going into its 10th year now, an old Olympus voice recorder, but the thing is still working. Anyway, you can email me, jrlexjr1947 @gmail.com. February, Black History Month. That means All Bones Considered on the 1st is going to spotlight several influential figures. Walter R. Livingston Jr., activist, architect, president of the Union League. Frances Mom Williams, who campaigned for the city council as a grandmother with the slogan, "Get off your rocker." Julie Kamai was born in Liberia. She was a lifelong advocate for the Liberian diaspora after she left during political upheaval. And Mposi Talbert, a 6'6" photojournalist known for his dreadlocks, who passed away suddenly at age 34 due to an undiagnosed heart condition. That will come out on February 1st, and then the individual stories will be released on the 4 following days. Mid-February, I'll tell you about the Reverend Leonard Smalls, a prison minister. What is meant by a ministry behind bars? Find out next month. Laurel Hill East, Laurel Hill West are both open 365 days a year, 7 a.m. until 5 p.m. now. No entrance fee. Come on in. There's parking at both places. Public transportation is better for East than it is at West, but you can still use the public transportation to get to Laurel Hill West. You just have to walk a little further once you get off the bus. And I have taken 52 of these scripts and turned them into a book. All Bones Considered, 52 Laurel Hill Women. Available at Amazon, also available in the gift shop at Laurel Hill East. Become a member of the Friends of Laurel Hill, and you'll get a discount on the bookshop, along with a discount on a lot of tours that people give, including me. I've got several tours lined up this year. Haven't seen the exact dates yet, but I'm pretty sure that I'm going to do at least 3 special tours at West and maybe 1 at East. I don't know yet. We'll find out how the schedule pans out. Anyway, stick around if you want to hear the bibliography for this amazing podcast, which I'm trying to avoid thinking about right now. I actually narrated it yesterday and just had to let that settle down before I went back and wrote the outro. So stick around if you want to, and I'll tell you the sources that I used. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, stay above ground. For a very helpful, very remarkable paper, A History of Gratz College, 1893 to 1928, by Diane A. King. Dissertation submitted in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, Dropsy University, Broad and York Streets, Philadelphia, 1979. This is a wealth of information, highly recommended. Available for free from the web. Just search for it. Not from the web, but from my own collection. I'd forgotten I had this, and I'm glad that I found it because I needed to look at it again. The Nazi Doctors, Medical Killing and the Psychology of Genocide by Robert J. Lifton. This was published originally in 1986. Basic Books, a division of HarperCollins Publishers. Scary book. It's hard to read, incredibly hard to read. The one that's even harder, of course, is The Living Witness, Art in the Concentration Camps and Ghettos by Mary Scarpone Costanza. The Free Press, division of Macmillan Publishing Company Incorporated, New York, and Collier Macmillan Publishers, London, 1982. I used a lot of newspaper articles to find out more about Mary. As far as reference material, Your best bet is actually a bibliography. It's called Holocaust Art as Resistance. It was prepared by an intern at... Where? Did I write down where this is from? I did not. All right. But annotated bibliography, and Katerina Stefanik, intern, put this together. It mentions Mary's book along with several other books which have since been composed about making art in the Holocaust, although Mary's was first. I'll let it go at that. I think that's going to cover most of the resources that I used. There were probably a couple of online sources. That's right. I got the history of the Jewish sailors with Columbus came from a Jewish history site, and I don't remember which one it was, but that was absolutely fascinating to me. I had no idea. Anyway, after a down show this time, we'll pick it up next time. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and stay above ground.